Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 15 on USA conflict 1954 to 1975. Now, the previous two videos, ladies and gentlemen, we looked at Malcolm X and then we looked at the Black Power movement. This video links back to those two videos because this video shows what was happening, the events in America, which actually helped to explain why people like Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panthers got more popularity in the 1960s. Now, the focus moves. We switch focus, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to my terrible map of America. Most of the events we've covered so far in the previous videos, they've been down in the southern states. This video, ladies and gentlemen, we change our focus. Most of the events that we're going to look at today, apart from this one over here in Los Angeles, the rest are all up in the northern states of America. So we are switching focus up to the north. That's what this video is all about. Now, if you remember my terrible artwork from last video, the Black Power symbol, the fist, F-I-S-T, frustration, integration wasn't happening. It was all too slow, so people decided to use new tactics, fist, the Black Power movement. And what we're going to have a look at today, despite some of the progress by Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement, many of the young black people in the northern cities felt this frustration that change was happening too slowly. And in the mid-1960s, ladies and gentlemen, this frustration burst out of the cities in the form of violence, in the form of riots. Quite apt that we have a fist. So what we're going to look at are the northern riots in the mid-1960s in America. Let's quickly go back to the map. The first one, right over here, possibly the most famous city in America, New York City, the first riot. Right the way across the coast, from East Coast to West Coast, Los Angeles, the next riot. And then we moved to Chicago, and then we moved to Cleveland, and then we moved to Detroit, and then we moved to Newark. They were the 6 key riots. There were others, ladies and gentlemen, but they were the main 6 cities to riot in America in the mid-1960s. In fact, there were over 300 riots in over 250 cities. They were the big ones. Now, see if you can spot what all of these have in common. New York riot, July 64. Los Angeles riot, August 65. Chicago and Cleveland riots, July 1966. Newark and Detroit riots, July 1967. Have you spotted the common link there? It's the months. The riots all occurred in the summertime. Summertime, and the living is easy. Well, it wasn't. Because as the temperatures rise, so did people's tempers. Temperatures rise, tempers rise. 1982, Billy Idol, hot in the city tonight. Well, it was hot, and people got very agitated. So all of the riots were in the summertime, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the riots were serious. Let's take as an example the Los Angeles riot in the district of Watts, W-A-T-T-S, but sometimes known as the Watts riots. Remember? August 1965, high temperatures. Over 30,000 people were involved in the riots, 34 dead, over 1,000 injured, over 4,000 arrested. $40 million worth of damage was caused in the Watts riot. The Detroit riot, over 40 dead. In all the riots, over 130 people dead. Over $700 million worth of damage. These riots were serious. Now, who's involved? Who's involved in the riots? One of my favourite bands when I was growing up, The Clash. Why riot? I want to riot. Why riot? A right of our own. They had a song called White Riot, 1977. But the riots in urban America in the mid-60s, ladies and gentlemen, were very much black riot, because it was the young black men in the cities of the North who finally had enough. Their frustration boiled over and they rioted. Now, here's the question. Why? What were the reasons for these riots? Well, as historians, ladies and gentlemen, we can divide them into two different sections. Short-term cause, long-term cause. Now, short-term is the trigger that happens just before the riot, maybe an hour before, maybe the day before. For example, in New York in 1964, a policeman shot a black man. That was the trigger for the riot. In Watts in Los Angeles in 1964, a policeman arrested a black man and the reaction led to the riot. The short-term cause. But alongside that, alongside the trigger, alongside the one local event, we have the long-term causes, things that have been going on for years and years and years. Just one spark won't cause 30,000 people to go out onto the streets, ladies and gentlemen, unless they're already really angry or really frustrated or really fed up and ready to explode and riot. So there were long-term causes of the Northern riots. And what were they, do you think? Well, think back to what we've looked at in the videos. The racism that black people had to face on a daily basis in America. The discrimination, particularly in their lives, their everyday lives. The schools they attended were short of resources. The schools were run down. Therefore, their education was poor. Because they had a poor education, they couldn't get the best jobs. The jobs, if they actually managed to get a job, were poorly paid. They were twice as likely, black people in these northern cities, twice as likely to not have a job at all. And as I said, if they were lucky enough to have a job, their job was not well paid. So therefore they lived in very poor housing, which was often overcrowded, often in disrepair, but it was overpriced because there weren't that many houses, so the price has gone up. So they're in jobs that are poorly paid, or they have no jobs. They're in bad housing. They've got a bad education. The facilities are terrible. Their landlord is probably a white landlord who doesn't really care because he might be racist. Can you see why these people were so ready to revolt and riot? The long-term causes of the riots. Think back to the last video. Remember I was talking about the Black Panthers, and I said they had some local success because they introduced things like the breakfast club for school children, giving away the shoes, free medical facilities, trying to improve pedestrian crossings, street lighting. They're trying to actually improve the lives when nobody else is. Can you see now why they may get some popularity? And people will say, well done to the Black Panthers. They are trying to make my life better. So it's these long-term causes which helps also to spark the riots. And a final point. The black people, particularly the young black men in these urban areas, felt that the police were against them. They felt that the police were biased. They felt that the police were violent. They felt that the police discriminated against them because of the colour of their skin. Well, here's a fact. In the 30 months before the Watts riot, the police shot 65 black people. 27 were shot in the back and 25 were shot when they were unarmed. Can you see maybe why the black people had that impression of the police? So there's the causes of the riots. Damage done. President Johnson would send in the police, eventually send in the army or the National Guard. Eventually the riots would calm down. But what were the reactions to the riots, ladies and gentlemen, in America? First one, Martin Luther King visited Watts in Los Angeles, and he said, right, I've concentrated all of my civil rights, really, activities down here in the Deep South. He said, I think I need to move it north. Remember, one of the groups he set up is called the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He says, we need to move north. So that's one of the consequences of the riots. Another one, some of the whiter people in America, some of the white people said, look, we're a little bit fearful or we're angry, and support for civil rights activities actually went down in some white communities. Another consequence. The third one, and the one that I'm going to concentrate on for the rest of this video, President Johnson says, right, I'm the President of America, I can't allow this. This isn't a good look for America in the rest of the world. We've got to find the reasons. We've got to be able to deal with this issue. Even if it means spending more money. Johnson later admitted that the riots convinced him that he should spend money in the ghettos of the urban areas in the northern states of America. So President Johnson, he sets up an inquiry, July 1967, called the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, led by a man called Otto Kerner. Well, I suppose America had a lot to learn from Otto Kerner. It certainly did. A hell of a lot to learn. Now then, Kerner went away, investigated the riots, visited the cities, spoke to people, and then he drew up his report. February 1968, the Kerner Report was published. Now, the Kerner Report, ladies and gentlemen, what were the main conclusions of the Kerner Report, 1968? Well, I'll give you one phrase from it, a very important and famous phrase. He wrote this: our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. That's what he wrote. That's the main thrust of his report. And he followed it up. He said, look, we as a country have to spend huge amounts of money on these black communities. And, he said, we must ensure that police bias and police discrimination is dealt with. They were the main thrusts of his report. Now, he had some specific points. Here we go. A few for you. Number one, the riots were caused by the terrible conditions in the ghettos. Education, employment, housing, all the things I've mentioned. Number two, the riots were caused only after white officials had ignored requests from the black community to fix these things. Number three, the riots were caused by there was no attempt to win the trust of the black community. Number four, the riots were made worse by police violence. Number five, the The media sensationalized the riots. They exaggerated the damage. They exaggerated the threat. This led to increased fear and anger amongst the white communities. And its final specific point, Kerner said, federal money, which was sent to the cities to improve the conditions after the riot, was in fact spent on police training and buying extra weapons for the police. They were the specific points from the Kerner Report. Now, he's made his points, and then he made his recommendations. How can we move forward? How can we move to a fairer, more equal, less segregated America? His recommendations. Number 1, white officials should listen to the black community and involve the black community in the decision making in their own areas. Number 2, police need to change their attitude. They're there to protect the people in the ghetto. The police needed to change their treatment of the blacks, which was biased, unfair and violent. They needed to build trust with the black community. And the final recommendation, huge amounts of money needed to be spent on the community, housing, education and employment. The Kerner Report, ladies and gentlemen, it was a very far-reaching, it was a very honest assessment. In a way, it was quite a damning indictment of America at that time. President Johnson listened. But later in the year, remember it came out in February 68, later in the year, President Johnson decided not to stand for re-election as president. He stood down. As a result, in the election in November 1968, his Democrats Party was defeated. The Republican Party succeeded. And in January 69, America had a new president, a man called President Richard Nixon. And Nixon came into power, and the Kerner Report was largely ignored, ladies and gentlemen, pushed to one side, and the money was not spent. So it didn't really change America as much as it could have. Maybe if Johnson had stayed as president, who knows? But that is what happened. So that's the Northern Riots, ladies and gentlemen. Remember I said the change in focus from the southern states to the northern states. Can you now see maybe why the Black Power, the Black Panthers, Malcolm X were beginning to gain support and popularity? Because of the terrible lives that the people were living there. And maybe they said that, oh look, they have got an answer. Maybe Martin Luther King is too slow with his methods. Now I've mentioned Martin Luther King there. Earlier in the video I said that one of the consequences was he decided to move his campaign north, and he did. Would it be enough? Next video we'll have a look at the impact of Martin Luther King in the north after the riots. So that's coming next. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. I'll see you soon.